The character of Barbara Gordon was introduced in 1967 as the second character to wear the name of Batgirl. From that moment forward, she appeared in her own solo series as well as team-up stories with the other members of the Bat family. But in the year 1988, in Batman the Killing Joke, Barbara was shot through the spine and paralyzed by the Joker. This would seem like an especially bleak way of ensuring that she would never fight crime again. But the following year, the all-new Barbara Gordon appeared in the Suicide Squad series as Oracle, a digital guru who would eventually become the go-to technology ally for members of the Bat family for almost the next 25 years. It wasn't until DC Comics rebooted their entire line of superhero comics in 2011 that Barbara's paralysis was undone and she was returned to her role as Batgirl. But if comic book creators Paul Dini and Alex Ross had had their way, this move would have happened almost 12 years earlier. The details are a little fuzzy, but according to Ross himself, in or around the year 2000, Dini told him about an idea he had to return Barbara back to her costume crime-fighting self. Ross drew some designs for this idea, and the pair pitched this to DC Comics, but were promptly rejected. I say things are fuzzy because Ross recounts in his art book Rough Justice that he and Dini were discussing this in regards to Batman the Animated Series. But as fans of that series know, Barbara was never paralyzed in that series, or in any of the sequel series set in that world. I assume that Ross was actually referring to DC Comics, where Barbara was paralyzed at the time, and he only meant that Paul Dini worked on Batman the Animated Series, but this idea would have been separate from his work there. Another fuzzy aspect is the placement of when exactly this pitch happened. Ross places this pitch at 2000, but that doesn't sound quite right to me. Around this time, the Batman comics were still involved in the mega crossover No Man's Land, which introduced a new character, Cassandra Cain, who would eventually become the new Batgirl. But Ross says that when he and Dini were working on the idea of restoring Barbara Gordon's legs, there were plans to bring back the Batgirl persona. Now, it could be that the reason DC rejected this pitch was because the plans to have Cassie become the next Batgirl were already well underway. But if this did indeed happen in the year 2000, Cassandra Cain had already donned the new Batgirl costume by that point. So unless neither Ross nor Dini were keeping up with the current comics at all, then it seems more likely that Ross is once again mistaken and that this pitch happened sometime earlier when the plans for a brand new Batgirl weren't quite so concrete yet. Regardless, whenever this happened, it doesn't change the meat of the pitch. The idea was that Barbara would be immersed in one of Ra's al Ghul's Lazarus pits, used to keep the user eternally young, but at the price of their sanity. In this case, instead of Barbara being driven insane, according to Ross, she would only be taken to a darker place emotionally, and this would lead to her becoming a darker anti-hero with, quote, vampiric ferocity. Now, personally, I think this idea sounds pretty darn cool. So cool that I'm kinda upset it didn't actually happen. It may not be a perfect idea, though, as I do see some problems with it. The first is a big thing many detractors of the New 52 leveled against returning Barbara to the Batgirl role in 2011. Specifically, taking away a powerful positive physical disability character in a medium that doesn't have very many characters with physical disabilities in the first place. Not to mention, the big problem I've always had, even before the New 52, when fans would often cry about Barbara not being Batgirl every now and then. Look at all the characters who could potentially fill the role of Batgirl. Canonically, we have Huntress, Cassandra Cain, and Stephanie Brown who have all filled the role at different times. If I'm being honest, Barbara doesn't bring much to the table as Batgirl that those other ladies don't bring as well. But as Oracle, she has skills that none of them can boast, and so she fills a special niche that currently isn't really being addressed since her legs were restored. And yeah, those problems would have still been present if Ross and Dini's pitch was accepted. Another problem is that if this pitch did get accepted, it would have knocked us out of some other characters. I already mentioned Cassandra Cain, who was already Batgirl at the time. So if DC decided they wanted to be especially squirrely and have two Batgirls at the same time, with Barbara going into the Lazarus pit immediately after No Man's Land, while Cassandra was getting on her feet in the superhero world, well, I'm not sure that Cassandra would have lasted very long. Look at all the other examples of superhero legacy characters who had predecessors that came back. Hal Jordan comes back in 2004, immediately pushing Kyle Rayner out of the spotlight into the satellite titles where he was slowly forgotten. Barry Allen comes back from the dead in 2008. 4 years later, people are saying, Wally who? I think it's good that DC made a choice because the character we got ended up being pretty awesome in a pretty awesome series. And I just don't see those stories and that character flourishing if the fans were too busy paying attention to Barbara Gordon walking again. There's that, and then there's the character who eventually came to wear this costume seen in Ross's designs, Kate Kane. While I know that this version of Batwoman first appeared in 2007, I'm not exactly sure when Ross's designs for Barbara Gordon were eventually drafted, as he puts it, into redesigns for Kate Kane. While I'm only familiar with this version of Batwoman from her appearances in the Weekly 52 series, I did enjoy the character, and like Cassandra Cain, I feel it would have been a bad loss if we hadn't gotten this character because of Barbara Gordon returning to crime fighting 8 years earlier. Although this doesn't seem like much of a if we get Barbara back we would never get Kate thing. For all we know, if we had gotten Barbara back in 2000, in 7 years of real world time, she might have reverted back to her more cheery, less broody self that would have been brought about by the Lazarus Pit. By that point, if the creators behind 52 still wanted to introduce Batwoman, they could have swapped Batgirl's Alex Ross costume with their new character while still keeping Barbara out in the field if they had a mind to. This wouldn't be an implausible situation, really. In the 1970s, a brand new costume was created for Dick Grayson, which he then proceeded to discard, but someone somewhere must have liked the design because the Earth 2 Dick Grayson went on to wear it. And speaking of ways this story would have impacted the rest of the DC universe, if a member of the Bat family used a Lazarus Pit to put themselves back in the field after a long absence, perhaps this would have prevented Judd Winnick from doing the same thing with Jason Todd in the Under the Hood storyline. Yeah, I know, he was only resurrected by a Lazarus Pit in the movie, not the comics, but close enough, right? I think if they went through with this Batgirl thing, even if the story was completely awful, if its very existence prevented them from bringing Jason back, it would have been worth it. But outside of the issue of removing a positive wheelchair-bound character from the scene of superhero comics, and the possibility of this move preventing other interesting characters from showing up, I think this could have been a really neat story to see. If Barbara is suddenly cured, how does she explain this to her father? Does she keep the wheelchair around and pretend like she's still crippled when she's not Batgirl? If the pit really has made her colder, does she fake her death to devote more time to fighting crime and cut herself off from her family like some weird cross between Chuck from Pushing Daisies and Bruce Wayne Fugitive? Would Barbara attempt to keep her identity as the new Batgirl a secret even from Dick and Bruce, who knew she was the original Batgirl? Would her identity even be kept a secret from the audience for a few issues before a big reveal showing that it was Barbara back in the costume? In what way would her healed spine impact her relationship with the birds of prey? Would she still help them but in the field instead of from a computer? Would her return to the field cause friction with her allies who aren't used to someone so emotionally cut off from helping them fight baddies? With so little information to go on, with what we do know about this pitch, the possibilities of where to go next would have been endless. One thing I do believe would have almost certainly been handled better in this pitch story than what happened in the New 52 would be the way in which Barbara is healed. The Lazarus Pit has been a plot device in the Batman comics since the 1970s, and is the most logical forehead-slapping, duh-inducing way of restoring Barbara if you are of a mind to do something like that. So when you find out that Barbara is back to being Batgirl in DC's new reboot, it almost seems obvious that the direction they would have gone with would be something like what Denny and Ross suggested. But no, the mechanism in which Barbara is restored in a New 52 is almost completely glossed over. I would wager none of the creators working at DC thought it was important how Barbara was walking again, just as long as she was. Probably in some misguided way of appealing to fans who they thought wanted to see Barbara back in a costume again. The reboot only vaguely hints that Barbara was apparently completely healed at a South American clinic a few years earlier, which I guess means that paralysis is no longer a thing at all in the DC universe. Maybe I would be singing a different tune if I ever got around to reading the Batgirl comics from the New 52, but I still feel like the Lazarus Pit would have been a more interesting direction to go. Not only are you not opening the door of, oh, so all paraplegics are healed at this magic clinic now, right? But the actual aftermath of her using the Lazarus Pit sounds like it would have been a very interesting fertile ground to explore, while the reboot only sought to try and recapture the way things were with Barbara in the Silver Age while applying a more modern sensibility to the series. Anyway, it's impossible to state with certainty what could have happened with this story if it had gone through, but trying to track my estimations, I think it would have been a neat thing to see happen, even if the concept would have burnt itself out after a couple of years and left us with a Batgirl who is back to the way she was before, but walking around. But what do you guys think? Are you in the pro always keep Batgirl crippled camp, or are you kind of like me and you think that under the right conditions, it'd be neat to see her paralysis undone to see what might happen? Either way, let me know what you guys thought of this video, and if you want to see more videos like this. I do other videos about different things, so be sure to check those out if you're interested. In the meantime, have a great rest of the day.